Добрий день, друзі.
Good afternoon, friends. Ukraine Media Center continues its work, and right now in our studio we have Andrii Niebytov, head of National Police in Kyiv Oblast. Andrii, you're welcome. Could you please tell us what's happening in Kyiv Oblast, how police operations are being renewed, and if possible, let us talk about the crimes committed by the Russian army in Kyiv Oblast. Hello. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'd like to briefly describe the operations of police in Kyiv Oblast, in our oblast, and in particular about in those territories liberated from occupation, where Russian military committed crimes and destroyed our villages and towns. By now, in all towns and villages of Kyiv Oblast, police operations have been renewed. In those places where our units have been destroyed, and those were 5 buildings, police has been located in other buildings jointly with local authorities. Even though with this lack of communications there, the police has made it possible to work using generators. We have internet connection using Starlink terminals, so we do not only carry out our police operations, but we enable people to use the internet to inform their relatives and near ones about their life. Thank God everybody is alive. We have our officers patrolling all towns and villages. There have been 180 of those occupied in Kyiv Oblast. We have been collecting information, looking for marauders, documenting crimes committed by Russian army, documenting the destruction. We are identifying collaborators, so those who contributed to occupation and supported the Russian army. And a separate issue is, of course, about dead bodies. We do found bodies of our citizens who have been killed by Russian army. They were lying in the streets, and their bodies, which were temporarily buried, people who were killed as a result of military actions. You know, we published a lot about mass graves, and unfortunately, we see that people buried there have been killed from firearms. So we understand that during that occupation, Russian army established certain regime. They tried to identify people who have some influence in the local community, and they try to force them to work for Russian Federation, to influence the local people to support their actions. We know about the tortured head of Matishin village council who refused to cooperate with the invaders, and she as well as her husband and their son were tortured and then killed, shooted. We found their bodies. We have studied them and sent them for forensic examination. Unfortunately, by today there will already be 900 dead bodies of civilians whom we found and sent to forensic examination institutions for detailed examination. There will be more than 900 people by today who have died killed by Russian army. Terrible. That's terrible. Andrii, could you please tell us, recently you published some information about the village of Shevchenkovo, and there has been a grave found with 6 innocent civilians who were tortured. Could you please tell us in more detail about that crime, about those events? Those are 6 people. 5 of them have already been identified by us. The first man, we know by now that he got a call from his acquaintance. It was in mid-March. His acquaintance called him and said the Russian soldiers are torturing 2 women near railway. He left his home and nobody saw him after that. The others are 2 brothers, again, local residents who had nothing to do with the territorial defense nor many military units. They were just lay people, local people. Unfortunately, they have also been tortured and killed by shooting. Another citizen, a local resident, was cycling across Shevchenko village on that day, and he disappeared. He was shot. I saw a question, somebody raised the question, why some of those people whose bodies we find have white pieces of cloth on their arms. I'd like to tell you that occupiers, invaders forced our people to carry those white stripes, like this person has been checked already. So our citizens would carry those white stripes, white pieces of cloth, just to make it safe against shooting. But we see that it did not always work. They always placed white pieces of cloth on their faces, on their buildings, and they also marked that there are children here. If you think about all those green corridors for evacuation, when there were cars moving, people tried to place some white cloth or something on their cars and to write children there to make it safe for people in those cars to avoid being shot by assault rifles. But recently in village of Avroshino, we came there to inspect Volkswagen Golf car where there was a family, husband and a man and his wife on the front seats, and on the back seat there was their mother. There was a lady with a child who was 1 year, 7 months old, as well as a 14-year-old minor and their grandmother. There were 15 cars in the convoy, and all those cars had markings and that white cloth, and there was an armored fighting vehicle who shot directly into that car. The lady had her head cut. The child was killed by fragments, and nobody survived, nobody but the driver. The driver has been heavily wounded and is now in the hospital, but we understand that his mind has been damaged very seriously. He will need serious mental psychological help. All the other local residents who were witnesses to those terrible events have been buried. So we carried out exhumation of their bodies, and we documented those wounds in their bodies and sent them for forensic examination. So I would tell you that this is on a mass scale. I'm sure that investigators of the National Police in Kyiv Oblast, as well as other investigators from our law enforcement agencies, will thoroughly document all those facts in the procedural frame, and it will allow us to bring to liability all those murderers, both under national, domestic legislation and the International Criminal Court. Thank you, Andrii. Could you please tell us, we see that yesterday exhumation started in Bucha from yet another mass grave. We understand that police officers have been documenting all those cases. What can you tell us what has been documented by the police on the ground? There were 2 mass graves. Say, those who were the guy who was working in Bucha before the war asked the invaders to allow him to take bodies of people from the streets, and he buried them in 2 mass graves. The first one had 40, the other one had 57 bodies. We have already exhumated 40 bodies. I'd like to remind you that there was one of our policemen there, the guy from our criminal investigation unit, who was also unfortunately shot from firearms. Most of those bodies have been inspected, and I'll tell you that 95% of them have been shot from sniper rifle or just usual firearms. So we understand that during that occupation, people were just shot in the streets. And this is a documented fact. In the 21st century, it's impossible to hide that sort of crime. It happened, and it was witnessed not only by witnesses, but also it was documented in the videos. So I'm sure that altogether all that evidence will allow us to bring those criminals to liability. In Bucha, there has been the largest number of victims. It means that those occupiers, those units acting in Russia, were the most cruel ones. We have already transported from Bucha more than 350 dead bodies, people who died. You understand, how dangerous it was to stay there in that town during occupation. There has been much lower number of bodies in Vyshgorod district, in Brovary district, but generally I'd like to emphasize that today we'll already have more than 900 bodies. Thank you, Andrii. Dear journalists, you can ask your questions. Please speak into the microphone and introduce yourself. I'm Marat Mujiri from Georgia, from Formula TV channel.
900 killed people. It's in Kyiv. You mentioned 900 killed people. It's in whole Kyiv Oblast or just in some cities? And one more question. We'll remember in Kyiv there was hard times, and now it's going back to the life. Is police going to have some additional measures to avoid some problems here in city? We remember diversions. Diversions and all these kind of problems in the city in the very beginning. Thanks.
Дякую.
Thank you. Thank you. Regarding your first question, yes, those are bodies, 900 bodies from all occupied territories. Most of all, the sad leadership is held by Bucha, where there has been more than 350 bodies. All the rest is from all those occupied towns and cities and villages in Kyiv Oblast. Also, the rubble, the ruins are inspected in Borodyanka and Makariv. We are sure that under that rubble, we'll also have more dead bodies. We'll document all of them. I'd like to emphasize again that those are civilians who have nothing to do with military service, with the territorial defense. Those are just innocent civilians who were just killed. Regarding your second question, indeed, successes of Ukrainian armed forces enable us to rearrange our forces and equipment, to review our possible mistakes in our activities, but generally the Ukrainian armed forces clearly planned the defense of Kyiv and its suburbs. As a result, we don't have the enemy here, and the enemy has already concentrated in eastern area. Checkpoints will be reduced, but their effectiveness will increase. So we have been working on that. Today we have already had a joint meeting with the military and national police to improve the transportation movement of citizens, to optimize and speed up those inspections so that people would be able to live their civil life even with this martial law in place, but also to be able to find sabotage groups and criminals and collaborators, people who help the Russian army in occupying our territories. Thank you. Any more questions?
Claudio Locatelli from TV and online media. Good afternoon, sir. So regarding the rape cases that have been occurring during the war in the Oblast of Kyiv, do you have some update about those cases? And do you have extra evidence if it has been a military indication, if it has been just cases, it has been a large number, small number? So if you can update about this point. Thank you.
Okay, on the general number of, about the crimes, about the violation of laws and customs of war, we have registered more than 3,000 such crimes, and all those criminal cases are being investigated now. A separate aspect of those is rape of women. We have had such reports from third parties, but when speaking with women, they refuse to file complaints or to confirm this information. By now, we have sufficient evidence regarding one fact, and there we informed about the suspicion. It happened in Bogdanivka. The occupiers killed a man there because he tried to defend his wife and their son. And under pretext of violence being used against that son. They came there 3 times and raped her. She managed to flee and now fled, and she is now in a safe place. We have inspected the evidence, we have inspected the building. Unfortunately, the building has been burned by occupiers. So you see that woman with her son and her husband has been killed, and their home has been burned. Another case was reported by journalists, and we spoke with a woman in Bordyanka, but she refused to file a complaint and to inform of the circumstances. You should understand those people, because they survived terrible things. Even in peaceful times, it's like, those crimes have high latency, so to say. But we try to cooperate with such women to get information, at least upon confidential terms, and to work under Article 438 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, which is violation of the rules and customs of war. That would enable us to bring all those people to liability for those crimes they committed. And I would tell you that our State Security Service of Ukraine and our intelligence, military intelligence, they work in a great way. They identify those military units with lists of their Russian soldiers who were in the occupied territories and who committed crimes against innocent civilians. And police in Kyiv Oblast has already identified more than 250 people from the Russian military who had been in Kyiv Oblast. And there are even some lists with their family members and their residence addresses. And of course, it will help the investigators when informing about the suspicion and initiating international search for those people. There have been 2 more rape facts registered by the Security Service of Ukraine. They are being investigated under Article 438 of the Criminal Code. That information was received at the very beginning, in the very beginning of March, when those so-called green corridors were created, when we were evacuating people, and during filtration they were providing that information. And at the moment we cannot confirm it nor disprove it, because those people left for other countries. And we understand that unless and until those victims or those witnesses come back, we will be unable to check that information in every detail. But I'd like to tell you that everybody who committed that rape, that violence, will be brought to liability. One of them, according to the armed forces information, Satan Romanov, who committed crime in Bogdanivka, has already been killed, the enemy of Ukraine who entered our territory with weapons. But the investigators have worked, and he will be announced for international search. If all by chance he's still alive, we'll definitely detain him, arrest him, and bring him into Ukraine to bring him to liability. Thank you. Thank you, Andrii. Any more questions?
France 24 TV. Yesterday, Lyudmila Denisova was here, and she spoke about large numbers of rape, much higher numbers than you were referring to. She referred, for instance, to 25 women who were raped in a basement in Bucha, and 53 people who had called her psychological center to talk about rapes as well. Your numbers, your figures, and her figures don't seem to coincide. How do you explain that?
There is a very simple explanation. Lyudmila Denisova works with international organizations, various organizations, including like Strada, psychologists, and all that. Of course, they don't talk on the procedural level. More to it, based on those facts, the main investigative department of the National Police, not for the Kyiv Oblast, but the main investigative directorate of the whole National Police, has registered those facts to investigate and either confirm them or disprove them. But I'd like to remind you that rape is so-called private accusation cases. So if the person does not want her data to be available with regard to this crime, you know that that person has to think again about all those circumstances of the crime, of the rape. It's about interrogations, it's about court trials, and very often people just don't want that investigation. But we cooperate with Lyudmila Denisova. I will not mention all aspects of our search activities, but I'm telling you about specific facts documented and registered in Kyiv Oblast. Thank you. Any more questions? No questions. Thank you, Andrii. Thank you for finding time to join us. Thank you for your work. Thank you for this opportunity for the whole world to see what's happening in Ukraine. Thank you. Friends, I'd like to remind you that at 3:30 we'll have a briefing by the spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Colonel Alexander Matuzyan.